You are listening to Kubernetes Bytes, a podcast bringing you the latest from the world of cloud-native data management. My name is Ryan Wallner, and I'm joined by Bhavin Shah, coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. We'll be sharing our thoughts on recent cloud-native news and talking to industry experts about their experiences and challenges managing the wealth of data in today's cloud-native ecosystem.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. We are coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. Today is August 22nd, 2024. Hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. I think we're moving through the summer at a really fast pace. I'm not ready for fall. So, keep this summer weather around. I keep seeing these. I follow a stupid Instagram account and they share, okay, the sunset is going to be earlier and earlier, and then last couple of weeks back, their post was, sunsets in Boston will not be after 8 p.m. for the remainder of the year. Now this week it was like it won't be after 7:45 p.m. I was like, okay, I'm not ready for for fall or winter to come out. So I'm although I'm not ready for that, I am ready for the NFL season to start. I'm excited for NFL in 3 weeks or 2 weeks time frame. I don't follow college football as much. For people that follow that, I think college football is starting even sooner than NFL football. So that's me. I have a national park trip planned as well. So second of this year, I'm excited for that. But that's enough about me. Let's talk about what's going on in the cloud native ecosystem. Kubernetes 1.31 is now generally available. It's a machine, right? Like the community just keeps pumping out these awesome releases. Again, you won't find like huge set of features being GA'd. I know the release lead for this release specified it as a major minor release. Like it had a lot of things that were part of the release, like maybe 5 to 6 went to stable, but then a lot of things that moved into beta, and then a lot of things that were introduced in the alpha stage. So again, with any other release, there are please go through the release notes and see what are the features that you want to leverage. Maybe there are features in beta, a few that I'll talk about today, that you want to try out and see what flags you need to switch if you're running the latest and greatest version, and decide for the organization like when you are ready to upgrade to this new version of Kubernetes. I think I see a trend, right? Like even with 1.31, similar to the 1.30 release, the theme or the mascot is something that's highlighting the fact that this is a project that's maintained by humans. So Ellie is like a dog that's the mascot for Kubernetes version 1.31. If you also listen to the Google Kubernetes podcast, you should check that out. Like the release lead was on there talking about why he chose this name and this mascot for a reason. So he can you can definitely find out more details there. But when it comes to the actual release, a few things that caught my eye, right? The first one was preventing persistent volume leaks when you're deleting the PV and the PVC in a different order. So before 1.31, again, if you don't even with 131, if you didn't have this feature flag enabled, if you delete the PV object before you delete the PVC, and then you try to delete the PVC, even though the reclaim policy on the PV was set to delete, sometimes Kubernetes didn't actually force delete the actual persistent volume or the LUN or whatever on the backend storage system. And now with this change, right, like regardless of the order that you delete the PV or PVC objects, Kubernetes will always honor the reclaim policy, and if you have set it to delete, it will clean up those resources on your backing storage system. So interesting and important update to the way Kubernetes or storage works on Kubernetes. Next up, I think it was a alpha feature introduced in Kubernetes version 1.29, and now it's promoted to beta. It's around having your pods, having an application that's going through the rolling updates, still comply with the pod affinity or pod anti-affinity rules that you have specified. So the issue here was if you are going through a rolling update, and if you had, let's say, pod affinity rules in place, Kubernetes wasn't able to differentiate between the n-1 version of your pod and the n version of your pod. So it was trying to, even if the pods were for different releases of your application, it was still trying to enforce those affinity and anti-affinity rules on your application. Now with this new feature, there's something called as match label keys and mismatch label keys as extra parameters that helps Kubernetes identify that, oh, these two pods are from different releases, so it's okay if I don't place them on the same nodes, even though there is a pod affinity rule in place where it asks me to place pods with the same label on a specific node. So definitely an improvement in the way Kubernetes handles scheduling on top of your for your applications, and it handles upgrades to the different versions of applications that you're running on your Kubernetes cluster. So something important is still in beta, but you can check it out and start playing around with it. And then the final thing that caught my eye was the introduction of a new API reference or something called as volume attribute class. So people who are using persistent volumes of on Kubernetes, right? There is a storage class which defines the provisioner, the vendor that you're working with. It defines a few different parameters, and then you have the actual size of the PVC object as well. So once you have deployed a persistent volume, the only thing that you can modify is the size of the PVC. You can't really change the storage class that provisioned it, which limited some of the functionality. Like if your backend storage system actually supports different levels of QoS policies, and if you deployed a PVC object at, let's say, bronze, where it gave you like 500 IOPS, read IOPS, and 500 write IOPS. But then if you wanted that persistent volume to have more resources available to it, you couldn't make that change without deleting and recreating it with like a different storage class with those parameters. With this volume attribute class, it's kind of a peer to a storage class, so you can define all of these QoS, for example, policy, IOPS, throughput, all of these things in a volume attribute class. Use that to deploy your persistent volume claim. So in addition to storage class, you'll also specify the volume attribute class. And then if you want to switch a volume from bronze to a silver to a gold IOPS, from an IOPS perspective, you can do that by modifying the volume attribute class. So interesting feature, again, still in beta with 1.31, but some of these changes are really interesting, right? Like it definitely shows the progress the open source ecosystem is making, and the speed with which SIG storage is listening to some of these community feedback and implementing some of these changes. So kudos SIG storage. That's enough for Kubernetes 1.31. Again, these are in no way all the changes that were introduced. So we'll link a bunch of blogs that the community has published for the 1.31 release with all the individual features that went to alpha, beta, and GA or stable. So go ahead and check it out. But then a couple of additional news items that I had on the agenda today. The first one being vCluster is now at version 0.20. So it's now GA. With the 0.20 version, you now have a unified Helm chart. So instead of having a Helm chart for each Kubernetes distribution, so like a vCluster K3s, vCluster K8s, vCluster K0s, and vCluster EKS, you now have one unified Helm chart with like a single values file that you can use to deploy your vClusters on your base Kubernetes clusters. Second change that caught my eye was Kubernetes distro that they're using. They're moving away. They are moving away from K0s to K8s, so which now means that they can support SQLite and external databases as backing stores in addition to etcd, which they already supported. If you already have vClusters running, switching from an etcd backing store to a SQLite backing store is not supported. You'll have to deploy like a new vCluster with a different backing store, but that's something new. And then finally, when we had Lucas on, we were talking about how EKS distro is one of the distributions that they're supporting as part of vCluster. Unfortunately, that has been discontinued. They do list out the reason why, like they were trying, it was creating a lot of confusion in the EKS community when vCluster was saying they support EKS distro, whether it was for the base cluster or for the virtual cluster. So they just decided that it's not worth the headache. They're now removing support for EKS distro. You can still run vCluster on EKS clusters you might have. It's just the distribution for those vClusters. You can't use EKS distro starting version 0.2 now. So that's a quick update from one of our previous guests. vCluster is definitely an interesting project that I like to track. And then finally, I have an acquisition to share with the community. Again, I know whenever I have acquisition, I'm so excited that I start the episode with it or start the news section with it. But this is something that I think I just saw on LinkedIn. Like, didn't see a lot of buzz. Again, I might not be connected to the right folks, but CloudBees acquired Launchable, and Launchable was a company that was founded by former CloudBees employees. I think Launchable started in 2019, and so it's kind of a homecoming for the founders that left and did their own thing, and now CloudBees is acquiring them again. Launchable, what do they do? Like, they bring a transformative approach. Again, this is from their website, right? So they bring a transformative approach to software testing through AI powered insights that optimize testing workflows. So by leveraging machine learning algorithms, they say that they can help you select and prioritize the most important tests which have the most potential impact on your release, thus significantly reducing test cycles and improving the accuracy of tests as well. So like, if you have if you're using CloudBees DevSecOps platform for your CI/CD pipelines, Launchable will be part of this. Going forward, you will see a list of recommended tests that you should prioritize over the others. So instead of boiling the ocean, it gives you that specific things to focus on. Definitely an interesting technology. I want to, like, if you are using Launchable today, feel free to reach out, or please reach out. I want to know how efficient this AI is. Again, we are in 2024, where all vendors are AI washing or LLM washing or GenAI washing their products. So I want to see how much of this is real. But again, it wasn't like, I don't know how big Launchable was. They didn't share like an acquisition price, but congratulations to the founders and the small team that they might have. You're part of a good company now. So I'm excited to see this new and improved DevSecOps platform from CloudBees. With that, let's introduce the guests for today. So we are going to talk about the data on EKS project today. And to help me do that, we have Alex Lines, who is a principal business development and GTM specialist for Kubernetes at AWS, who is also a data on Kubernetes or DOK ambassador. So I'm happy to talk to him. And then we also have Vara Bonthu, who is a principal technologist and worldwide tech lead for data on EKS project, also at AWS. So I'm excited to have these couple of AWS folks join me for this podcast to talk about data on EKS. So without further ado, let's bring them on the pod. Hey, Alex. Hey, Vara. Welcome to the Kubernetes Bytes podcast. I'm excited to have you guys on the show to talk about data on EKS. Alex, thank you for connecting with me. I know both of us are part of the DOK ambassadors community, so it's always fun to talk to another ambassador. Why don't you take like a couple of minutes to introduce yourself? And Alex, let's start with you.
Yeah, of course. Definitely always fun to connect with another ambassador outside of our ambassadorship, for lack of a better term. So my name's Alex Lines. I am a principal container specialist at AWS, specifically working on our Amazon EKS service, and even more specifically than that, working on this open source project that's called Data on EKS that helps customers build data analytics and machine learning workloads on top of EKS. And Vara is my main partner in crime on that. So Vara, I can hand it over to you. Do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alex. Thank you for inviting me to this podcast. And my name is Vara Bonthu. I'm a principal open source specialist working with AWS and primarily working with the strategic accounts within AWS and focused on open source data and ML solutions running on Kubernetes. That's my key focus and specialty around the skills as well. And I'm also leading the data on EKS initiative, and I think we are going to talk about along with Alex Lines, and we are taking that to what customers' requirements are. But yeah, that's me, and looking forward to talk to the audience. And
awesome, thank you so much. Right, so before we dive into both of you like mentioned data on EKS, but before we dive into data on EKS, let's take a step back and talk about data on Kubernetes. Like, I want to get your thoughts, right? Like, Ryan and I have been doing this podcast for 3+ years now. It started as a data on Kubernetes podcast, and we have had so many different guests talk about it. But I wanted to get your perspective. Like, why do you guys think it makes sense to have your databases or data workloads run on Kubernetes? And
yeah, Bar, you've been in this.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Bar, you've been in this space longer. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure, definitely. And I think this is a very interesting question, and there is a wave that is coming out, right, with the customers and users who are running data workloads traditionally on Hadoop, right? So Hadoop is a way, a distributed way of processing the data workloads for terabytes and even petabytes of data. It's been there for a very long time, and that served us. Even today, it is serving for a lot of customers and users. But then Kubernetes as a platform is emerged, at the same time along with the Hadoop for a long time, and it is becoming more and more stable to run the stateful workloads such as Spark and various other workloads. And then that's also actually made that a lot of these customers who are leveraging Kubernetes as a platform for their microservices workloads, and they started to think about if they can run data and ML workloads. So having a single platform to run everything in one place, right? So that's the core idea. And then a lot of these frameworks and the users went back to these original frameworks like Spark or maybe Dask or various other data frameworks, and they went ahead and raised an issue on the individual repo saying, hey, can you add Kubernetes as a resource manager other than Hadoop or using Yarn? And that's when it started. I don't remember exact date. And when Spark added a support for running workloads on Kubernetes as a resource manager, in addition to what we have with the Hadoop, and that's when picked up and everyone started to try running Spark on Kubernetes. And it took some time to get stable, but now we reached to the point where a lot of users are now currently running Spark on Kubernetes workloads in production now, and now going back to why we do that is because of the some of the key features, and I want to mention that, right? So why they use Kubernetes? Why can't they use Hadoop, or why can't they use what they have today? So there's a two key things. The Hadoop commits are declining because it's being an open source, and there is a huge Kubernetes interest, and there's a lot of more features and supporting stateful workloads and adding storage support into Kubernetes is making them interesting. And scalability is the key factor with the Kubernetes. Kubernetes allows users to dynamically scale their workloads, and based on various tools like Carpenter open source and Cluster Autoscaler, compared to traditional Hadoop static clusters. And you can do all of that with Kubernetes. Scalability will give that. And the second thing I would like to highlight is a unified platform for the workloads, for non-data workloads and data workloads. So now, because Kubernetes is being used as for microservices, traditionally running these retail applications, all the business applications, scaling and everything, but then platform teams are comfortable running Kubernetes, and they say, bring it on, bring the data and ML workloads onto this, and there is a framework support. We can definitely run. It makes their life easier to maintain the same platform and run various types.
No, I think. Go ahead. Finish your thought, Vara. Yeah.
Stop there. Now, and then the third point, and I want to mention, is the portability, right? So for what Kubernetes brings is the portability, where the individual data teams, data engineers, and data scientists, they can package their dependencies and then package their code into their own Docker file, which will not have any kind of impact or effect on other applications running on the same Kubernetes. So that gives the freedom to these data teams. Hey, I don't have to worry about this library being modified by somebody else because I'm packaging my own and I know my container works, so I can deploy it and I can scale it independently, while the others running different versions of the Spark within the same Kubernetes cluster. I feel portability gives that freedom for the developers and data scientists to do what they want to do.
No, I think it makes me happy, right? Like, because I've been to multiple AWS summits, reInvents, and given like I was representing a vendor when I was at these shows, but whenever I would bring up data on Kubernetes, I would always get an answer that, oh, I'm just using things like RDS or a managed service. Why would I want to take on this additional responsibility of running databases on Kubernetes instead of just relying on a managed service? So I think the points that you laid out, I definitely echo those, right? Like, it's not about using a managed service or not. It's about the unified platform. It's about the portability that Kubernetes brings to the table. So, no, thank you for going into that level of detail. So now, Alex, do you have anything to add, or do you want me to move on to the next question?
I think Vara killed that one. I don't think I can add
Okay,
anything
perfect.
to it.
Yeah, I don't want to miss out on your expertise as well. So jump in. So my next
Sure.
question is like, why data on EKS, right? Like, okay, the community, like there's a DOK community, SIG Storage does a kick-ass job. Like why AWS decided to bring out like another open source project called data on EKS? Like what were some of the challenges that you guys were trying to solve there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we started from the EKS go-to-market team. A few years into the service, we continued to hear feedback around you can't just spin up an EKS cluster and deploy applications onto it. You need networking, you need storage, you need CI/CD, you need all these things to be able to deploy and run an application. And because it's Kubernetes, a lot of those things are often open source, right? The most popular tools are open source. And we needed to help our EKS customers build clusters that were ready to run applications faster. And the way that we decided to do that was actually with one of our first open source projects from our team, which is called EKS Blueprints. We basically built Terraform modules to help customers spin up EKS clusters that we call batteries included, meaning that they're ready to run applications on top of them. And we built them for different common patterns. So say you need to separate by namespaces, separate teams by namespaces. So we built a pattern for that. So we decided to codify these best practices. And that was really well received. Customers started to build that into their Kubernetes platforms because they were using Terraform, and we got a lot of the patterns right because we built it based on their feedback. And then we, and primarily Vara and the customers that he was working with, started to hear a lot about, hey, this is good, this is helpful, but I want to run data workloads. I want to run particularly Apache Spark was the first one that we heard about. And these clusters need to look different. They have their own networking configurations. They have different sets of add-ons that we need to see in there. So we said, okay, we like this Blueprints project, and Blueprints is still alive and well. It's out there. A ton of people are using it. And we said, we want to help this class of customers that are trying to build these workloads that look different. And that's why we built the Data on EKS project, to help customers along those same lines of accelerating the time that it takes for them to build these applications. That's why we built Data on EKS. And one of the questions you asked is, there's already a SIG group, there's already Data on Kubernetes community, like why Data on EKS? We found that we can be really opinionated, more opinionated and go deeper because we've focused on our AWS sets of services. And we have the resources to do that, right? We have teams of people that we can put towards solving these problems. And a lot of the patterns that we build have best practices that could be extrapolated elsewhere. So how are we setting up networking to run Apache Spark on EKS? That can be extrapolated to running it somewhere else. But because we've focused it on our own services, we can go deeper and work with our customers and build patterns that are more deeper in the weeds of solving these technical problems.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, right? Like, I think I get the why. Like, what is it though? Like, what is data on EKS and what does it include? Like, blueprints are battery included. What's the marketing version for data on EKS then?
Yeah. Oh man, the marketing version is tough because we love to talk about the tech here. So Data on EKS is built around a set of Terraform modules. So that's at its very core. There are Terraform modules that spin up these workloads according to best practices or really good practices. Best practices are still kind of developing, considering how new this space is. So we've got Terraform modules that you can use and run in your environment to spin up the EKS clusters and install the add-ons and have a cluster that's ready to run these applications. And then on top of that, we've built documentation that's really more like a tutorial that says, okay, here's how you're going to run these. It gives you step-by-step instructions. Clone the repo, run Terraform apply. Here's how you can test a given workload. So back to the example for Spark, we give code to run a TPC DS benchmark, which for those that are not familiar, that's the canonical benchmark in the space of Spark, so that you can install all of the open source tools on top of your AWS resources and then run a benchmark so that you can understand how well it performs. So that's what Data on EKS is. It's these Terraform modules with instructions for how to run them. And then the inherent thing is that we are scanning our customer base and surveying our customer base, really talking to them and understanding what are the most important patterns for us to build. So by something making it into Data on EKS, it's a curation that says, hey, this is something that we see as important and prevalent today, or something that's growing that we want to help our customers with.
Gotcha. And I think you brought up Spark. I think personally I've used the JARK JARK blueprint or the
Yeah.
module inside data
Yeah.
on EKS. Like, what are some of the example use cases or templates that are available as part of this tool, right?
I love that.
Yeah.
So we have Apache Spark blueprints. We've talked a lot about that. That's really our most prevalent use case. But then what's really growing is machine learning, and particularly with this Gen AI boom that we're seeing, everyone is trying to figure out how do we harness the power of this technology.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of ML patterns that cover training, it covers inference. We also have our JARK stack, which is Jupyter Hub, Argo Workflows, Ray, built on Kubernetes. So this is something that gives you the training and serving built on top of Kubernetes with auto scaling and all the things to make that work. So I would say really we're centered around Apache Spark, which has a breadth of use cases you can use it for, and machine learning. We have other patterns around stream data processing, things like Kafka Flink. We have some data warehouse patterns, some distributed database patterns. So there are some others out there, but really what we're focused around is Apache Spark and machine learning.
Gotcha. But like these individual templates, right? What do they actually include? Like you said, it will help me deploy my EKS cluster, but is that it, or does it include all the different services like VPCs and things like that that I would need to run a specific workload?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can take that. Yeah, sure. Awesome. So, and I think going back to echo what Alex said about the patterns, right? So, in the summary, we have patterns for data analytics workloads, streaming workloads, distributed databases, and machine learning. And within machine learning, generative AI is a big part, like both training and inference. And then we are spending a lot of time these days just building those generative AI patterns, which is mostly coming down to the customer saying how to run so-and-so inference or all the training on Kubernetes using Ray or using Triton server and so on. So there are the complexities we're trying to solve with the pattern. So going back to your question, what does pattern contains? And like Alex said, we use Terraform just to deploy the cluster and all the plugins and everything add-ons necessary, but that can be customized by the users, and not necessarily everybody say that we don't use Terraform, we use Pulumi or we use CloudFormation CDK and so on and so on. That gives them like a foundation to take a look at what we've done and convert into it with the world of AI. It's a matter of using some AI tool to convert from Terraform to something else, right? So I don't want to put it out there, but yeah, it's just straightforward.
Now, I've seen
And
people
then our focus is
just
mainly
generate like Ansible modules by talking to Chat GPT, and like the first time I saw that I was like
Why
12
not?
months, 15 months back,
Why
and I
not?
was like,
Yeah.
bam, like okay, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Vara. Yeah.
Yeah, Code Whisperer, GitHub Copilot. I don't want to mention any of there's so many out there. The way it's going out there, you can generate that. Why not? If somebody says, have you used generative AI? Then I said, go for it, use it, increase the developer productivity. It's going back to, but what we are trying to prove is in that pattern, other than the Terraform templates, we also have these, we call it as patterns or examples to actually run the workloads, like say Spark, to run Spark workloads using EBS volume as a storage, or NVMe SSD as a storage, or FSX for Lustre as a shared file system. How do we do that? Those are the challenges we try to solve with these examples. You'll find a lot of examples and individual blueprints, which goes about talking how to use various compute, storage, and and so on. That's the what you get from the patterns, and we try to like not best practices in a way, because don't want to use Alex doesn't want to use best practices for just a good practices. We try to put scalability practices in every single blueprint. Hey, when you run these workloads at large scale, you might hit the issues related to IP exhaustion, or you might hit issues related to code DNS, and we kind of solve those individual problems within our blueprints as much as we can. But every customer's requirement is different, or user's requirement is different. When we talk to that, we kind of provide the further guidance to make that happen. So that's what you see, like in simple Terraform templates and some examples, and then proven examples on how they can accelerate customers' journey.
Okay, but that's what's included. What's missing? Like, what do if I'm a user, right, and I'm trying to
Okay.
deploy this in my own AWS account and maybe scale it for production workloads? What is missing? What do I need to watch out for?
What's missing in this case, I would say, if the users, you really need to every customers or the users who are building their platform is in terms of the security, the how the network is built is completely different. So we talk to them first initially. Say the customer will say we have a completely fully private network, we can't use this blueprint. And then when we talk to them, we ask them to do a couple of changes to make these VPC fully private or making the EKS cluster fully private. And but we can't show all of those things in the blueprints because the users, a lot of these users want to try
Yeah.
that blueprint as is on their ESN account. It doesn't work because with the fully private clusters, you can't access it. You need to have bastion hosts or some sort of a way that you talk to private clusters. It makes it difficult and they might not even try these blueprints. So the idea is put it out there so that they can run it, test it, and then now when they are going into productionizing, talk to the AWS folks or talk to us, and then we can help you to do the tweaks to make it fully
Gotcha.
private. And yes, we, other than within the Terraform, we show how to create a VPC, we show how to create subnets and how the IPs needs to be allocated for each subnet. And it's a secondary side range topic, like how to avoiding IP exhaustion issues. And now there is a blueprint that we're literally working on. It's in the work PR, IPv6.
Ooh.
So we're trying to see how we can use IPv6 clusters for Spark. Now all the support out there so that all these users and customers who are today using IPv4, they can start looking at our blueprint and then build IPv6 clusters.
Like, that's an interesting point, right? Alex, let me jump in here.
Please.
Are people using or asking for IPv6? Like, IPv6 is always that thing that is around, sometimes shows up in RFEs for at least vendors on-prem. Like, oh, yeah, your tool needs to support IPv6. But are people actually using it in production?
I asked Vara this question yesterday for the record. So Vara, go ahead and answer.
Yeah. So IPv6, it's in early stage, but I think if I put it, a lot of our customers are doing POC, and some of the customers are thinking of adopting IPv6. But when it comes to adopting, is what type of workloads? For Spark, I think now we are trying to show that you can use it. So far, the users hasn't gone into usage of IPv6. The reason because the individual add-on support for IPv6 wasn't
Gotcha.
there. Like Spark Operator, if the user's using Spark Operator, they need IPv6 support. That was merged recently, like I think a month or so. And original Apache Spark itself added IPv6 support with specific, I think 3.4 version. I don't have rightly in specific version. So those supports are being added to the IPv6. And I think we are in a stage that we ran some tests internally. It's good to go out there and build that Spark clusters on IPv6. Our tests are proving everything works fine, including the logging and observability with the IPv6. Hopefully, the reason we say is if the future is going towards IPv6, we are there ready.
Yeah.
And I know we are running out of IPv4 worldwide. It's not something that we can increase that or fix the problem. And the only way to fix the problem is using IPv6.
Gotcha. But based on your answer, right, it feels like it is mostly workload specific. Like Spark, for example, you mentioned a couple of times that it suffers from IP exhaustion issues, and you have the pattern actually accounts for that. For these workloads, maybe it makes sense. It's not ready. Like people are not ready to move to IPv6 for any general purpose workload. Is that a fair statement based on your experience?
Yeah. You're right. You can say that because IPv6 is solving IP exhaustion issue for sure, but at the same time, it just the business applications like in the gaming
Hmm.
world, IPv6 might help a lot, and there are specific set of areas where IPv6 is going to make a big impact, and Spark is one of them. Just because we have thousands and thousands of pods are being created by the Spark workloads, and you need more IPs for
Okay.
sure. But yeah, who knows what might come up. But for workloads like AML, for training, you only use a bunch of
Hmm.
pods, and for inference, yeah,
You know, slash
really
24 is
elucidate
big
what kind
enough.
of use
Yeah.
cases.
Okay, I think now I understand that what's not included and why these patterns, right? But how is AWS building these patterns? Like Vara, I know you mentioned, or Alex mentioned that uh, you guys started data on EKS because customers wanted best practices or good practices guidelines. So is there like a team inside AWS that's testing each of these applications and coming up with these patterns, or you're talking to like customers who are design partners? Like, what's the process? Like, how do you come up with the pattern in the first place?
Alex, you want
All
to
right.
take that? Yeah.
Yeah, I can take that one.
Mm.
So I'd say it's a mix of both.
Mhm.
So at AWS, we pride ourselves on being customer obsessed and working backwards
Mhm.
from what we're hearing from customers, and that's exactly how Data on EKS started. Right, we
Yeah.
had EKS blueprints based on customers asking for help, Data on EKS based on customers also asking for help, and we're continuing to iterate based on the challenges that we see with customers. Honestly, one of the best types of contributions that we can make to one of our blueprints is a customer comes to us with a problem that we can work through and help them solve, and then
Mhm.
we genericize that and upload it back to our up to our blueprint. So if you look at like our Spark operator blueprint on our website, you can see all these different sections to it, and a lot of those were built by customers saying, "Hey, I want to use only Graviton," and then we build
Okay.
that pattern in, or whatever the example may be. So
Yeah.
it's largely built based on customer feedback. The balance is when you think about something like generative AI, where it's so new and it's still developing, we do
Mhm.
have a team of specialists. By and large, our specialist solutions architects for Kubernetes and for open source projects are the ones doing most of the contributions to the project. And they have to spend a lot of time thinking about, what is, VAR spends a lot of time in this area specifically. What are the right tools to test different generative AI models, different
Yeah.
LLMs, and deploy those? So, what's the right set of tools that we can pull together? And you can't always go to your customers and survey them and say, hey, how are you doing this?
Yeah.
Because it's so new. So a lot of it is built based on that customer feedback, but then there's also, our specialists who are investigating the area, working with customers, and then piecing together bits and pieces and an understanding of tools to build these recommendations to help kind of shepherd people in the right
Yeah.
direction or provide some
Yeah.
thought leadership is really the better way to put it, of, hey, here's how
Yeah.
we think someone should be putting this together. If we were to go out and build this is what we would build.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I think recommendations that come from AWS, like I've been in this ecosystem for so many years. I've always listened to those, right? Like, okay, if you guys are telling me this is like a well architected framework, this is how things are supposed to be, and this is how I'm supposed to deploy things. Obviously, every organization will have to customize it for themselves in their use case, but it's a great starting point to have. What you wanted to add something?
Yeah, sure, 100% what
Yeah.
Alex said, right? It's a big internal team who is working on, like we started with few folks and then when I've
Mhm.
grown up to 30 contributors.
Oh wow.
As you see, it's open source now at the moment, but it works. We are working with EKS service team and EMR service team and few other service teams within internally. But then the interest is more around how to build all these open source frameworks into and run it on Kubernetes. It's not
Hmm.
one man's job,
Yeah.
and I have to give credit to the entire data and EKS team who is tirelessly working on individual patterns, and then we are helping them to run some benchmarks to prove that pattern can go out and publish, and so that we can recommend to the customers. Like, yes, most of the requests from customers, and some of them are emerging tech. We wanted to be in a place that we help the customers who are doing POCs with, they want to figure out in generative AI world now whether they want to use Ray, NVIDIA Titan,
Yeah.
or VLLM, and they have a lot of questions around it. And I thought first to get that working, they need to accelerate their time, and I think they spend like 2 to 3 months and figuring out all these things. And rather with this blueprint, they can run the POC within few hours and then change the tools and test it, whatever works for them, and they can use it. That's the whole idea. Yeah.
I think I always like to go back to this quote, right? Like execution eats perfect strategies lunch every time, and I might have butchered that, but it's important to get started and make progress rather than waiting for the perfect alignment to happen before you even take your first step. So I think that makes complete sense. Uh, like we spoke about what's included with each of these patterns, right? And in addition to AWS services, you guys also deploy like open source operators like the Spark operator, and for the Jark stack, I've seen like other operators being deployed. So with this project, I know it's open source, but what is AWS supporting? Is there a shared responsibility model when it comes to data on EKS as well?
Yeah, this is a really good question, and one that we get not just for data on EKS, but on any of these solutions architect maintained products.
Hmm.
So any AWS service that you're deploying through data on EKS or through some other project, at the end of the day, that's an AWS service. You're going to get support for that service.
Hmm.
However, open source tools are not covered by that AWS capital S support.
Yeah.
What we provide for data on EKS is what we refer to as best effort support. So if something is broken, you can raise an issue on our repo and say, hey, I was trying to deploy this pattern and ran into this issue. And we'll get to that to the best of our ability. But the caveat there is we're not pager carrying engineers, and we don't have the resources to support this in the same way that our AWS services do. So that's the kind of the trade-off, and we do try to be very clear about what data on EKS is, in that it's a collection of blueprints to help you get started, and what it is not. It is not an AWS service with that capital S support.
Okay.
So we try to be very clear about that when we talk about data on EKS, and then also on our website.
Okay. So like I completely get that, right? Alex, thank you for clarifying that for us. Uh, how do we handle when how do you handle customers that are modifying these patterns and running it for production, right? Like one thing that comes to my mind is security, like CVE scans, right? All of these container images, since they are in the
Mm.
open source ecosystem, might have CVEs pop up from now and then. Like, do you guys publish a new version of the pattern immediately and monitor for CVEs and ask customers to upgrade, or how does the security side of things work?
Var, do
Yeah.
you want to talk a little bit about our security posture for the project?
Yeah, sure. So maybe you can add that, but when it comes to the security of the Docker images, it's definitely not something that we are publishing or asking customers to use the images that we are publishing. We advise the customers to actually run their own security vulnerabilities just using ECR or any other
Hmm.
artifactory they're using. It's a big topic in a way
Yeah.
because the CVEs can be introduced by various frameworks and various tools that they are packaging as an image. So it's purely customers need to work out, um, and up to date with them. Like in likes of the managed services or another thing, there you get support from the service teams. But in this
Hmm.
case, yeah, and all the Docker images that we are publishing under data on EKS is samples only to give them a reference of how they
Gotcha.
can build an image with the frameworks. But then security is still under customers' responsibility for these images.
Okay. And that means I can maybe look at a template and or a pattern and basically swap out images. If I have a different Spark image that is like a golden image inside my organization, I can swap that out. So how customizable are these templates, right? Like right from the smallest piece, which is replacing container images, to
Mm.
maybe selecting a different storage solution. Instead of using EBS, I want to use FSX for NetApp ONTAP and use that add-on that's available inside AWS. Like what's the level of customizability?
Yeah, so customizing is pretty straightforward. The reason being, we adopt EKS blueprints and EKS blueprints add-ons. It's a
Mhm.
Terraform projects that we maintain, and EKS blueprints add-ons comes with quite a lot of add-ons, which is each. So FSX file luster is one of the add-on. Like
Okay.
EFS is another add-on. Any storage items or operators.
Hmm.
And even plugins like NVIDIA device plugin and Neuron device plugin, these all comes as an add-on. So users can switch on and off the add-ons that they want.
Gotcha.
If you see most of the blueprints, we have pretty much the same content across all the blueprints, but we couldn't build one massive one, but we have to repeat the same thing for every single blueprints of, hey, you need VPC CNI, you need this,
Yeah.
you need that, pretty much for every single cluster. Yes, it's easy to swap out and use whatever the customers want to use it at the moment.
Okay. And like, do you see like data on EKS has been around, right? So when you're working with these end customers, are they making these changes? And if they're improving the template or pattern in certain way, are they submitting PRs to get those changes back to the repo? Or if a vendor wants to publish changes, like how does that work with the data on EKS project? And
Um,
Alex, you are part of the community. If you want to take this, yeah,
I was going to say I can talk about the vendor contributions, and then
yeah,
Var, I can let you talk
yeah,
about how individual users contribute.
okay,
yeah.
As far as vendor contributions, one of the things that we learned from our EKS Blueprints project the hard way is that Kubernetes, because it is open source, there's such a strong
yeah,
open source ecosystem around it and so many partners. And we work really closely with a lot of these partners, and even our team had good relationships with partners based on previous customer engagements or whatever that may be. And when we built EKS Blueprints, we said, yeah, we have such a great opportunity to bring in all these different patterns and provide this, to use a term from my Amazon retail days, this selection, right? Give people lots of different choices there. And we learned the hard way that that puts a ton of overhead on our team, because every pattern that we take on, every add-on that we take into our repo is
mhm,
something that we have to maintain, because, Bob, and to a point that you made earlier, if AWS is making a recommendation, that carries a lot of weight, and that's something that we take very strongly.
yeah,
So if we're making a recommendation for something that is outdated or that may be insecure for some reason, that was a ton of overhead that our team took on. So our stance as far as open as vendor contributions is that we are not taking them into our repository, because we have to be very selective around the things that we're able to maintain
gotcha.
with our SA driven project. That said, we have one contribution and a few ongoing conversations around partners that want to contribute open source patterns.
Hmm.
So we have our pattern for ClickHouse was actually built by an AWS partner, Altinity.
Okay.
They built it using an open source operator, so it's not us recommending a partner product. And they host it in their repository. So they own all of the maintenance for that.
Hmm.
They're using our underlying EKS Blueprint modules, which saves them a lot of overhead. And our team is maintaining and updating kind of those core modules. But they built something with an open source operator, and then we link to that from our data on EKS website. So we can say, hey, here's a pattern for a really popular data warehouse that we have
Yeah.
had customers ask for. And here's a partner that's built that. So kind of creating an ecosystem in and of itself around that. So that's how we look at kind of the partner contribution space.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
And what about the users? Like if you're
yeah.
working with customers, if they want to contribute back.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I can answer that. So it's today we have 69 contributors. I think I just looked at it before I answered this. So if that includes the users and majority of the AWS folks, and also some of the customers. And there's a two ways. And sometimes customers comes back to us and say, "Hey, Vara, we did this. We've done a couple of other changes." And then instead of asking them to spend time to raise a PR, sometimes we take on that change and raise a PR ourselves. That's
Gotcha.
that's happening quite a lot. And another ways, we have some customers who also adopted some customers who adopted it. They added themselves as an adopters page if you go out to the website. And we are actively asking customers who are using it, go and add yourself to the adopters page. But yes, we do have contributions from customers and some of the users who are using it. But yeah,
Okay. No, I think that's always good, right? Like building in the community, building by taking in the community feedback is always the right way to do it. So I'm glad that Data on EKS project is doing the same thing. Uh, I think I remember looking at a reInvent talk that you guys did with a customer. Like So I know that there are public references. Can we talk about like a few of these public references and how they're using this project, or uh, what was involved in them adopting data on EKS as part of their workflow?
Yeah, Vara, you were worked super closely with the two references that come to mind for me, both Pinterest and Mobileye. So I can hand this one over to you if you want to take this.
Yeah, sure. So there are many customers, and again, getting public references is not something that we want to mention it publicly unless we
Yeah.
get something. But yeah, Pinterest and Mobileye and various other customers, and I think we're talking about, I don't know the number, Alex, maybe 30 plus or maybe 50 plus customers, and we
Oh,
work with
wow.
various patterns and various solutions. Not necessarily all the customers are using the whole blueprint as is, but there are
Mhm.
customers who needed help in specific thing within Spark or specific thing in Flink. So we go out and then show that fix and how to build that and fix that. But again, we use the same blueprints to run a POC and show it to them.
Gotcha.
Yes, these are the customers. Then probably, and I think by end of this year, you will see more public references from other
And
customers
Yeah.
as well.
if we talk about Pinterest specifically, right? Like, were they already using EKS, or data on EKS actually helped them adopt Kubernetes and adopt it for running, let's say, Spark workloads or any other workload that they might be using it for? Like,
Yeah.
where were
So
they in the journey before? Where were they in the Kubernetes journey before they started using data on EKS?
sure. So they have been running on Kubernetes for a long time,
Okay.
and they decided to move a non-Kubernetes based data platform that was running using Hadoop on EMR. They decided as part of their modernization, because they're headed towards Kubernetes, to move that onto EKS. And they talk a little bit more about why and their learnings in this reInvent presentation that we gave, that I'm
Hmm.
assuming we can link to in the show notes or
Yep.
something like that. Wonderful. So that they were a longtime Kubernetes customer, and they wanted to refresh their code base, start to get away from Hadoop. Var talked about that
Yeah.
lack of contributors and really the acceleration around Spark. So they saw this convergence between, hey, us as a company, we're headed towards Kubernetes, and we see that the big data community is headed towards Spark. So they did some evaluation. They looked at a few different options, and they decided that running Spark on EKS using the open source Spark operator was the right decision for them, and they decided to spin up their Spark environments on EKS using our blueprints. They were one of, if not our first adopter of the project.
That's super awesome, man. Like, who moving like the entire infrastructure stack is not an easy thing to do, and them trusting data on EKS and Kubernetes as a platform, and then obviously the TPCC benchmarks that you guys deploy as a testing tool once the pattern is completely deployed. I'm sure those help. So no, thank you for sharing those. As Alex said, right, we'll make sure that we include those reinvent talk links in the show notes. But I think I want to talk, like, start to wrap this up. I want to talk about like what's next for data on EKS. Vara hinted at maybe having like a few more public references. Maybe one of those 50 customers are going on stage with you guys at reInvent this year. But what's next in terms of the project? Like, can you guys share something around that?
Var, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, sure. So, and I think if you ask me what's next, and at the moment, our key focus is strengthening the existing customers' platform that they are running today, data and ML, data workloads on
Mhm.
EKS. That's one key focus for us, helping them to, solve these scalability issues and making it. And for that reason, we are running internal benchmarks and trying to prove internally to solve some of the problems so that we can go back and provide the solutions to them. And a second thing is around, like, individual frameworks are evolving quite a lot. Like if you take Apache Spark, shuffling is the biggest concern, right? So if they want to process petabytes or terabytes of data, traditionally we were recommending using NVMe SSDs or using EBS, multiple EBS volumes, and to get a better performance out of it. But there are other like remote shuffle services coming up, like Apache. Some call it as Calibron or Celebron.
Mhm.
That's one thing as a remote shuffle service. Those are the areas we're looking in to focus on. extending the blueprints to make it work with that and run some benchmark to see if that can solve the problem. So we just want to keep a tab on what's going on in the open source world and ensure that that is available to these, not just stay with what we
Yeah.
have with Spark and just keep recommending for next 10 years. That's not our goal. So
Mhm.
we're just keeping an eye on that. And in addition to that, the major focus, because of all the AI stuff, generative AI on Kubernetes. So
Yep.
we have a bunch of AI folks, specialized AI folks who are looking into building these patterns and showing how you can use various tools and so on. So that's the major focus. And I guess, yeah, that's what I can think of, Alex.
Yeah, I had a feeling we would go in these two different directions, and I completely agree with what Vara is saying because we're working with customers who are at the cutting edge of these things. So Vara, I
Mhm.
don't know that you mentioned this, is a maintainer of the Kubernetes Spark operator. They're adding new features. They're improving people's ability to run Apache Spark on Kubernetes. So
Mhm.
continuing to develop the capabilities is super important. And I'm not at all trying to discount that. I think we also have the opportunity as a project to grow in a different direction. So if I think about a customer who's running Spark on Kubernetes, they're doing it as part of a data platform. But the
Yeah.
blueprint that we've given them is here's how you run Spark in and of itself, right? But we also have a blueprint for Trino. Well, Trino needs data, right? So you need
Yeah.
something to ingest the data so that you can have your query layer. We also have separately, like, so the Jark stack is a good example of this. We tied together different tools to say, here's how you would build a very lightweight but an ML platform, right?
Mhm.
How do we attach data to that? How do we say, hey, here's your data platform, here's your ML platform, and here's how they connect? So I
Oh.
think we have the opportunity to grow in terms of telling more of the story, showing more of the story. And then with that, I think the other thing that I would like to see us do more of is building more workshop modules. So we have EKSworkshop.com is a great
Yep.
tool for customers and individual users to learn more about EKS. It's broken up by modules. Here's auto scaling, here's observability, a really good experience to go and walk through and learn those things. And right now, where our Data on EKS project is, if you understand Terraform, great, you're going to be golden. If you don't, you might have a little bit more trouble. So I think that telling more of that full story of here's how these pieces fit together and why this is important.
Yeah.
So not just, hey, running Spark, here's how Spark fits into your data warehouse or your data lake. Um, and then also giving folks a better experience to consume the information and understand how it works. I think that's another area of growth that I see for us as a project.
Okay. No, I think I love both of those answers, right? Like all the things that Alex mentioned around plumbing different things together. So if I'm brand new to a specific ecosystem, like I'm diving into Gen AI for the first time, like this is everything that I would need. But then Vara talking about like, oh, even in individual of these domains, like we're going to the next level and monitoring or observing what's going on in the ecosystem and what are the different tool sets coming. So not just increasing the breadth but also the depth of each of these patterns. So no, that's awesome. Like I'm looking forward to just watching this project and see what all patterns show up and for me to try. I think that brings me to my last episode, like where can users go to learn more information, maybe get started. Like are there any tutorials? Can they just start using it in their AWS account? How do you recommend like users give this a shot?
Yeah, I would say get started on our website. So not necessarily the GitHub repository, but you can start on our website. There's a nice intro page that talks about what data on EKS is and what it
Mhm.
provides and kind of the landscape that we're trying to help customers navigate. And then if you want to get started, I would say pick a blueprint that is most interesting to you and
Mhm.
deploy it and start to test there. And then if you're looking to interact with us, if you are an AWS customer, if you have an account team, they know where to find us. We're fairly loud internally and they can get a hold of us. If you're not, if you're an individual user, we have issues on our GitHub repository. We encourage you to open an issue if there's something that you're an issue that you're running into that we
Mhm.
need to fix, or some feature or functionality that we don't have yet that you'd like to see. That's how you can interact with us as an individual member of the community.
Gotcha. Vara, any links you want to add? If not, I'd like to close this.
Yeah, yeah, that's what just Alex said. It's the data on EKS, and currently it's hosted on AWS GitHub, the
Mhm.
website. The link will be posted in the channel to everyone, and that's a good way to start. Um,
Perfect.
and
No,
yeah,
No, thank you so much, Vara and Alex, for your time. Like, this was an interesting episode for sure. I had looked into data on EKS, as I mentioned it. I had deployed the jar stack, but definitely ended up learning new things. So I'm hoping our listeners find value too. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Kubernetes Bytes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks for
thanks,
having me.
Bhavin.
This was really
Yeah.
fun.
Okay, that was a good episode. I definitely learned a few things. I know I kind of already summarized it as part of closing the interview section, but I like the way data on EKS is giving users a starting point. Like, this is a personal story, right? As I mentioned to Alex, like, I have used the jar stack before, and this was me 12 months back when I was trying to figure out, like, okay, all of these GenAI tools on Kubernetes are getting a lot of buzz, but I want to get some hands on. And I was able to use like Kubeflow project to deploy Jupyter notebooks, and I was also able to successfully use like the Jupyter Lab Helm chart to deploy Jupyter notebooks on Kubernetes. But then I didn't have like an inferencing side of things, and I was looking at NVIDIA Triton servers and similar projects like VLLM, but there wasn't like an end-to-end solution that I could use to learn more about this GenAI pipeline, right? Then the container specialists at AWS published this blog where they were referring to the data on EKS and jar pipeline. And I was like, okay, this is the perfect start. So I love the fact that they're giving people like me, people who are new to a specific domain, workload domain, a good starting point that's backed up by best practices and things that you should keep in mind. I think data on EKS is definitely a valuable resource to the community, especially if you are in the AWS ecosystem. Personally, I'm hoping that they expand it to EKS Anywhere, or they even since they're using Terraform under the covers, they expand it to other cloud providers as well. Again, you can take Terraform modules from EKS or GKE and have the same best practices involved. Obviously, that will involve a lot of tweaking, but and AWS won't be able to support those components, but I'm sure the community can come together and have like a unified way of deploying certain things, or unified best practices for deploying certain applications or data applications on top of Kubernetes. I like that they clarified the support structure, because when I'm seeing something from AWS, there might be assumptions that are made by customers. They're like, okay, if I'm deploying this, even if I have an issue with the Spark operator, since it was part of the pipeline, part of the pattern, I can reach out to my AWS support person. That's not the case, right? Like, it will be best effort. Like, these are open source components at the end of the day, so the user has to take on the responsibility of testing it and managing security and things like that. But the AWS team is still adding value, as Vara had mentioned on the pod. Like, there are 30 plus people inside AWS that are working on building these patterns. So it's not just that they're throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. They are actually running through these, testing it out and finding scenarios like IP exhaustion when deploying Spark, and then publishing it. So I like that. And then personally, to prep for this episode, I had looked at the Pinterest, the reInvent talk. So I'll link that in the show notes as well. It shows how and why they moved over from Hadoop to Spark on Kubernetes. So it's a great session. And as Vara and Alex hinted, right, they might have more of these public references come reInvent this year, which is in a quarter. So overall, a great project. If you are an EKS user, definitely something for you to check out. We'll have links in the show notes for you to get started. So with that, I would like to thank everybody for listening to another episode. Please share this podcast with your friends, with your colleagues, with your competitors. I don't know, just people that you know, people you think might find value in listening to a Kubernetes podcast. So I really appreciate that. Give us 5 stars, subscribe to our YouTube channel, all of those usual call outs, right? But with that, I'm Bhavin, and thanks for joining another episode of the Kubernetes Bytes podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Kubernetes Bytes podcast.